I don't understand what possible justification could be put forward for stamping on somebody's head when they're on the floor. It just beggars belief. But then it's this debate that then has sort of come out of it, and actually, potentially irresponsible debate as well, which will just stoke up tensions that perhaps don't need to be stoked when the incident itself should speak for itself and should be dealt with appropriately.
To have you with us here on Pinar and Friends, an hour of good conversation in very good company, which tonight is the highly esteemed political strategist and advisor Joe Tanner. Hello, Joe, lovely to see you. And Theo Usherwood, of course, is back with us. Hello, Theo. Let me ask you first, Joe, what's your thought for the day?
My thought for the day is blood. Give blood. There is a big shortage.
I thought you were talking about Donald Trump for a second.
No, not quite. We've moved on from that. My mum actually had her operation at King's College Hospital cancelled a few weeks back when there was that cyber attack on the blood supply or testing facility. And basically they've said now that has contributed towards this shortage that we've now got of O and O negative. So I plead, because my mum's operation has finally just been rescheduled for August. So I'm really hoping that they'll get the blood supplies back up in time.
Well, best wishes to your mum as well. And Theo, what's your thought for the day?
I know we're going to be discussing it, but I was looking at, and it's great that Joe's here actually, because I'd be interested in her thoughts on it. But I'm just astounded. I know people are looking at this video footage from Manchester, but the thing that's really struck me, perhaps more than the video footage, are the statements, the first statement in particular. And the way that it just seems to be the police getting in their excuses. And it talks about a referral to professional standards, i.e. the internal investigation, rather than the IOPC, which, of course, is the external body that investigates complaints against the police. And I would have thought that had Greater Manchester Police looked at this, and I cannot understand for the life of me why they haven't done it, looked at what had happened in that video, why they wouldn't immediately refer it for an external investigation. Because if you wanted to portray this was a mistake, that this was a quote-unquote bad apple, a rogue police officer acting in a way, and I heard the statement from the very senior officer this morning on Times Radio that this was something that he didn't recognise, then why on earth didn't the statement reflect that in the first instance? And it seems to be that they have been dragged kicking and screaming to the position where the Greater Manchester Police have seen what everybody else has seen about this whole incident and how terrible and how appalling it is. And I don't quite understand why in 2024 we have a police force, one of the largest police forces in the country, which is behaving or thinks that isn't, the first response was an adequate response.
Okay, but if it is, as you described, as a pretty slow realisation, I do want to pick up on those themes precisely because that is the story which is just grabbing so much attention today. I'm just going to recap on it. We know the now viral video depicts an officer kicking an individual while he was lying head down on the floor at Manchester Airport. That officer has been suspended. We know that. The Mayor of Manchester, Andy Burnham, he gave this reaction.
It's a very disturbing image and hard to justify. But of course, I've had the opportunity now to see the full situation as it escalates, and it does escalate very rapidly, and there are issues on both sides. You can't say that the whole situation is clear cut because of the way it unfolds. But then I don't resile from what I originally said. Even though I've seen all of the build-up, it's still a disturbing image, and it's right, therefore, that the matter has been referred to the Independent Office of Police Conduct, that an individual has been suspended, and there will now be a full investigation.
That's Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, striking a judicial tone. Now, this afternoon, Ahmed Yaqub, who's the legal representative of the individual seen being kicked in that video, he spoke to press outside Rochdale Police Station.
It was something that hasn't been seen before, such police brutality. And I could tell you guys now that the people who were assaulted by the police are members of a police officer's family who is currently serving in the Greater Manchester Police Force. This man is now afraid to go to work. He went in today and spoke to his supervisor, and the only reason he is not going to work because he is fearing for his own safety, and he thinks, like his family members were the victims, he could be a victim.
Well, that's the lawyer of the man who was being seen seeming kicked in that video. Now, earlier, I spoke to the former Scotland Yard Superintendent, Nusrit Mehtab, and asked if, in her view, Greater Manchester Police could be trusted to deal with this incident properly.
No.
You do not?
No, and I'll explain why. Let's have a look at what's come through in the last week regarding Greater Manchester Police. The Vera Baird report and the fact that they make, the unlawful arrests are endemic, and the fact that 7 officers have already been suspended for extreme racism.
So, what do you make of this, guys? I mean, first of all, Joe, we wouldn't be having this conversation in anything like this sort of way if it wasn't for social media. But social media is part of the world in which we live. It's part of the environment surrounding any sort of incident of this kind. Now, what do you make of it?
Well, it's where social media sort of has its positives and its negatives, because ultimately there's a lot of footage out there which, to the very point made earlier about the statement that was made and how quickly these things can almost be not necessarily closed down, but even covered up. The fact that there is footage widely available means that people can see this incident from more than one angle. They can make their own mind up about what went on. The problem is that is also dangerous, because then what happens is there's this huge debate and quite frankly, often ill-informed comments that appear, and we've actually also seen those come from members of the House of Parliament as well. So there is a real risk that this thing sort of becomes something that it perhaps wasn't. It's an incident in an airport, doesn't appear to have been handled particularly well, just in terms of it looks like a very chaotic scene. I don't understand what possible justification could be put forward for stamping on somebody's head when they're on the floor. It just beggars belief. But then it's this debate that then has sort of come out of it, and actually, potentially irresponsible debate as well, which will just stoke up tensions that perhaps don't need to be stoked when the incident itself should speak for itself and should be dealt with appropriately.
It's inevitable, as it is unavoidable now that this has now been sucked into the old culture war.
Yeah, and the fact that, one of the relatives, the brother of the victim, who's now, they've just found apparently a sort of cyst on his brain through some scan that's taken place, is actually a serving police officer in the force. I mean, that's a hell of a curveball to have thrown into this whole thing.
Yeah, let me just read this to you. It's our listener, Duncan, who writes in from Taunton. Thank you, Duncan. Duncan says, my daughter's about to join the police, and I'm quietly frightened about it. Her boyfriend, who's been in the police for just over a year, has already been stabbed. We all sit in our armchairs judging the actions of others. Perhaps we ought to exchange places with them for a spell, although this particular individual seems to have used excessive force, but we need to see the whole incident. That's Duncan's contribution in Taunton, who's written in. Again, thank you, Duncan. I want to add this. Farward in Walthamstow in London has said, a head stomp on a man already subdued is someone out of control. An armed officer should not be out of control. I mean, at all points, we've seen the video. The reaction is inevitable. The row and the political controversial, absolutely predictable. But there is an investigation in train. I don't want to go too far down the point of judging this particular case in detail and pointing final fingers of blame.
We have to remember that there are plenty of good officers and other public servants, whether they're paramedics, whether they are people that drive those ambulances, whether they are people that work in sort of prominent roles where they deal with the public, who actually do suffer violence, often unprovoked, on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Which also, there are good stats out there that you can find out. The problem with this is, we are aware that there were other officers that were injured, but it still beggars the question of, can you simply justify then that because a couple of people were injured that you then stamp on somebody when they're laying on the floor? It just doesn't make any sense. I think
part of the problem is that I heard that response there from Andy Burnham, is I think it needs. We've seen the response from Richard Tice from Reform, where he made this comparison that somehow this was the sort of policing we wanted to see, and if we'd seen this in Leeds, then we wouldn't have had what happened in Leeds with the riots in Leeds, and actually this was something that the British public should sign up to. So to your point about the culture wars, we not only have now an incredibly fast-paced social media situation where these things accelerate beyond what would have ever happened 10 years ago, but we've also got a political climate where we have 5 members of Parliament in Reform UK who are there elected by the British public in their respective seats, but have latched onto this very quickly with some quite incendiary language. And I think that can create quite a toxic mix quite quickly. And I would have expected I would have thought that the best way to deal with that and to combat that, whether you're the Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police or the Director of Communications of Greater Manchester Police or the Mayor of Manchester, Andy Burnham, in effect the Police and Crime Commissioner for Greater Manchester Police, is to act quite swiftly, not to prejudge what's happened, because of course that footage is only a snapshot of events, but it is in an airport, so there will be CCTV as well, but to move quite quickly to get this referred over to the IOPC, to suspend the officers concerned. You can suspend them on full pay, and then that would allow a full and in-depth investigation to take place as quickly as possible to get to the bottom of what has happened. But also on the other side, there are many good police officers who would never countenance using violence like that. And it's an incredibly difficult job being a police officer, as it is being a paramedic or being a firefighter. They are regularly subject to abuse. I've done campaigns on it when in a previous working life. It is incredibly difficult. But I think if you can actually act much more swiftly and dampen things and give the community the reassurance that you are taking it seriously, then it's actually possible to dampen things down a bit and get some control in the situation.
It is a pity and a shame that we even have to ask the question: will Greater Manchester Police be trusted to have a proper independent look at this thing and to deal with it appropriately? Because in the climate that we are in, with so many cases where police have cast doubt on the ability of themselves and their colleagues and their senior officers and their forces to be open and frank and honest in confronting their problems, that's always going to be one of the first questions.
And I think that is a suspicion of the public. The one thing I would say that I think is and maybe I'm being very bold in saying this, but I think there is one individual involved in this that I think will make sure that the truth comes out, and that is Andy Burnham himself. If ever there was a crusader for getting to the bottom of what on earth has gone on when you look at Hillsborough, when you look at what happened with the Manchester bombing, that is a man who tends to get an issue and drives it until the truth comes out. And I think I would count on him to stand up and actually ensure that ultimately for the sort of the long-term future of his city, he needs to ensure that this is dealt with properly, because otherwise it will cause significant problems for that community.
Okay, I'm going to just read out this statement from Greater Manchester Police. It says, following a thorough review of further information that's become available in relation to an incident at Manchester Airport on Tuesday evening, Greater Manchester Police has suspended a police officer from all duties. A referral has been made to the Independent Office for Police Conduct for a full independent investigation. Then it says, we understand the deep concerns that have been widely raised with us and will continue to meet and discuss these feelings with Greater Manchester residents and elected representatives while this independent investigation takes place. We will be watching the progress of all of that.